So hello everyone and welcome to the third edition of AI Waves. If you are here for the first time, let me just brief you what AI Waves really is. So it is a series of webinars that is focused on applying AI in business and also about the opportunities that artificial intelligence can bring to companies. And today we will be focusing on the topic of changes in legal regulations regarding artificial intelligence, which are the result of the latest ordinance made by European Commission. So before I introduce our speakers, let me just go through some logistic details. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded. So even if you miss something or have to leave for a while, you don't really have to worry because the video will be available to every registered participant. And also secondly, during this discussion, feel free to write your questions on the chat. The final part of our meeting is the QA session. And during this QA session, we will go through your questions one by one, and our speakers will have a chance to answer them. All right, so if you know all the logistics and if you know what will be happening, now it's time to introduce our speakers. Beril Sirmacek received her PhD degree in 2009, officially from the Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science in Istanbul. After her PhD degree, she worked at German Aerospace Center Earth Observation Group and as a guest lecturer at several German universities. In 2012, she started working at TU Delft in the Netherlands. Later, she focused on developing her own AI and big data processing framework within her own company, Create4D. Her framework IP is registered at the Benelux Office of Intellectual Property. Between 2017 and 2019, she worked at the University of Twente, where she developed AI, computer vision, and SLAM algorithms in the field of healthcare. In 2020, she joined a Jönköping University department in computer science and informatics in Sweden as an assistant professor when she had sharpened her research on explainability and trust issues of AI algorithms and smart buildings and earth care applications. And finally, in 2021, she joined Saxion University of Applied Sciences in Eschede, the Netherlands, as an associate professor when she directed her research line towards Earth observation and AI applications for smart cities and their climate adaptations. Hello, Beril. It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for the introduction and inviting me. I'm so happy to meet you, the audience, and other panel members. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Martin Ciupa, who has worked for a variety of companies in his career. At this time, he is the CEO of Remoscope Incorporated, which is an AI-based teletech startup, and the Mental Imaginary, which is a hybrid AI chatbot company. Prior roles included MindMaze as head of AI initiatives and CTO of Calvary Robotics software division, developing intelligent automation systems. Additionally, Martin has worked as a senior manager in AI cybernetics and robotics systems and IT&T solutions based primarily in Europe, the Americas, and Asia. The roles encompassed both technology and commercial roles at an executive level. Martin also operates his own consulting company called Science.io. His academic background is physics and cybernetics. Hello, Martin.
Hello, sorry for the while it took for my video to come on. Nice to meet you all. I'm looking forward to this session.
All right, our third expert is Jerzy Biernacki, Head of Innovation and Business Development at Miquido, PhD in Computer Science at University of Science and Technology in Krakow. Jerzy's passion is to aid companies in cracking their toughest problems and grow their businesses with the use of top-class tailored software solutions. His vision is to allow them to take advantage of the latest technologies such as AI, machine learning, and data science. His mission is to help them shape their visions to innovate products and services into reality. And he has had an immense pleasure of doing just that in several dozen high-tech projects for corporations and startups, including brands like Universal Music Group, Onkyo, HelloFresh, Aviva, Nextbank, PZU, and Play. Hello, Jerzy.
Hello. Hi.
And now let me introduce our law experts from Konieczny-Wierzbicki Law Office, Łukasz Wieczorek and Michał Barwicki. Łukasz Wieczorek specializes in the law of new technologies, intellectual property law, unfair competition law, business law, and immigration law. In his everyday practice, he works in an international environment. In particular, he advises foreign clients that invest in Poland and entities operating a business outside of Poland. Łukasz has excessive experience in matters related to AI sector. He took part in tens of projects, drafting and negotiating IT agreements with business partners from the USA, Europe, and Asia that operate in the banking, finance, insurance, gambling, hotel, and music sectors. Hello, Łukasz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to our discussion.
So are we. And our last speaker is Michał Barwicki, who specializes in banking law, the law of payment services, IT law, and the law of new technologies. He is a member of the FinTech, Payment Services, and Banking team. Michał is experienced in providing comprehensive legal services to entities operating in the FinTech and new technology sector. In his everyday work, he participates in the provision of legal services to a reputable global group of companies operating the payment and banking services sector. Michał has extensive experience in terms of new technologies, cloud data storage, and artificial intelligence. He advises on the legal aspects of using these tools in the operations of enterprises. Hello, Michał.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm looking forward for this discussion, and of course, thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure is on ours. So, all right. So now, if you know our speakers, let me move to the first part. Here you can see the agenda. We are starting from the first part, which is the overview of the updates to the European Union regulations. So this will be presented by Michał Barwicki and Łukasz Wieczorek. Gentlemen, you've got our full attention.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Today, we would like to discuss about the present the European Commission proposal on the first ever legal framework on artificial intelligence. And let me go to the next slide. The first thing to discuss about Artificial Intelligence Act, first of all, I would like to indicate the basis and the genesis of this regulation. The idea to regulate the AI is not new. Artificial intelligence has for the long time been the subject to the discussion on the agenda of the European Union. As you can see already in 2018, the European Union defined some strategic goals in the approach to the AI. Then in the further years, 2018, 2020, the specific postulates and requirements related to the use of artificial intelligence were more and more precise and broader defined. As the result, the so-called white paper on AI was released, which is in a way summed up the results of work on AI in the European Union. This document also became the direct basis for the proper regulation, the Artificial Intelligence Act, which will be the subject of our presentation. It should be noted that artificial intelligence was not only the area of interest for the European Union itself, but also for a number of international organizations, like you can see, like OECD, G20, and various types of market regulators, including especially financial market regulators and supervisory bodies. In this regard, I'm pretty sure that there's no doubt that in the is the financial market that is leading the way in terms of the regulation of the AI. And as you can see, there are a number of guidelines, rules, and regulations. So the so-called the soft law that already was issued by these regulators and that apply to artificial intelligence in the financial sector.
Yeah, now we can go to some material provisions of the proposed EU regulation on artificial intelligence. For the sake of clarity, we don't want to describe one by one every provision that was proposed by European Commission. What we want to do in our presentation is to present the most interesting, the most problematic, the most curious issues and regulations that was covered in Artificial Intelligence Act. Among this, we think one of the most important ones is definition of artificial intelligence system. As you may notice, the proposed regulation does not define the mere artificial intelligence. It uses a definition of artificial intelligence system. According to regulation, it would be a piece of software that generates specific predictions, recommendations, and other stuff for a defined set of objectives. And what is most important, it is that this particular software must use specific techniques and approaches that are listed in an annex to EU regulations. As you can see on the slide, there is a bunch of, broadly speaking, AI techniques and approaches that are prerequisites for having an AI system. As you can see, we have here machine learning approaches, we have some expert systems, and also some statistical approaches, search and optimization methods. So at the first glance, one may say that it looks quite extensive. Another important issue is that this catalog of techniques and approaches that are incorporated in AI system is to be reviewed periodically by European Commission in order to follow the technology development that are constantly growing in this field. We know about quantum computer developments. We know about further development of deep learning techniques. So the proposed regulation is assuming that the definition should be technology neutral and subject to constant review and updates. If we look at this definition, many questions may arise, many comments may arise. Before our today webinar, we had a lot of discussions, talks with various business entities, people who deal with AI in their business, day-to-day business, and we just wrote there on the slide some questions that usually arise around the definition of artificial intelligence system. For example, whether the definition is too narrow or maybe it is too extensive. What methods would the European Commission apply to ensure that the update of the catalog of approaches and techniques, AI approaches and techniques, is effectively updated? Because this might be a real challenge in practical terms. And we also noticed a concern that although the European Commission proposes a regulation to handle the artificial intelligence issue, which is to be directly applied by each European Union member state, On the other hand, there is a concern that the practical application of Artificial Intelligence Act might be different among particular member states. So it is not only about applying unilateral regulation among all European Union member countries, but it is also a concern whether it would be possible in practice to ensure that the interpretation and practical application of this regulation would be the same among every European Union country. These questions we leave open. We do not want to answer them right now. This is something that we are looking forward to discuss with our other panelists. I think this would be a good starting point for discussing this issue in the second part of our today agenda.
The second important thing in terms of this act is how this act was built. So the idea is that this regulation is built on a so-called risk-based approach. So the classification of AI systems was therefore made according to the level of risk. This approach is expressed in a simple principle. The greater the risk, the wider the range of requirements and regulation that shall apply. This approach fully determines the scope of regulation that will apply to a given algorithm. And in this regard, the regulation distinguishes four categories of risk. So the first one is an unacceptable risk AI. This category includes artificial intelligence systems which are contrary to the main values of the European Union, for example, because they infringe some fundamental rights, and therefore these systems by this regulation have been prohibited. I will come back to this category and then I will describe later and describe this prohibited practices in details. Then we have the most important category, the second one, a high-risk AI. This category includes artificial intelligence systems that carry significant risk to the security, and this is why the system should be subject to strict regulations and requirements. Due to importance of this AI category, we will discuss it in details at the later stage of our presentation. Then we've got the third category, which is limited risk AI. This category includes AI systems that do not involve significant risk. However, these systems should be subject to some certain minimum transparency obligations. So the users of this system will be aware that they are interacting with artificial intelligence and not with the human being. As an example to this category, we can include chatbots. Then the last category is a minimal risk AI. This category includes artificial intelligence systems that the use of which has minimal or no security risk for us, and therefore these systems are not subject to the provision and requirements of the Artificial Intelligence Act. For example, to this category we can include AI-based computer games. Coming back to the category of unacceptable risk AI, it should be noted that the regulation in this respect indicates certain practices in the field of AI that are to be prohibited. These prohibited practices include, as you can see, in the first category, various types of manipulative and subliminal practices or practices which taking advances of our weaknesses which seems obvious that should be prohibited in the context of our values and fundamental human rights. Then we've got practices that are really a hot topic in which we prohibited the authorities to use the social scoring systems. It is important, for example, in context of the information that we have about the use of such system in practice, for example, in China. Then for the third category of prohibited practices, we have the practices that use real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces for law enforcement purposes. However, that third category, it's not a strict prohibition because there are some exemptions in this regard, and to be honest, there are quite a lot of them.
Yeah, and as Michał said, high-risk AI system is an AI system that poses very significant risk to fundamental rights, security, or health of AI system users. So that's the fundamental basic assumption for the European Commission. And according to EU regulation, the proposed regulation, the AI system will be qualified as high risk if it is to be used in certain specific areas. Those areas are also to be defined, to be listed in an annex to EU regulation. So we may expect that they will be subject to review, to updates. One may assume that European Commission will be taking advantage of this possibility. And on the slide, you can see the list of those areas that are supposed to pose significant risk for users if they are to be engaged in operation of particular AI system. So, for example, if the AI system would be used in vocational and training education, that would mean that provider of such an AI system would need to meet special requirements. Those requirements will be subject to my quick comment on the next slide. Here, the proposed EU regulation says that AI system in education area might seriously affect the course of a person's educational or professional course of life. So this requires that such a system is subject to strict specific obligations. If the AI system is used as safety component of a particular product, it will also be defined as qualified as a high-risk system. Another area is AI system that is used to manage, to operate critical infrastructure, which is, for example, gas, electricity, water supply, etc. That's actually self-explanatory. The same issue is with biometric identification. I'm really curious about our other experts' opinion, what they think about qualifying biometric as high-risk AI system. That's also self-explanatory, so we'll look forward to our discussion. If the AI system is to be used in, let's say, HR sector for recruitment processes to evaluate performance of particular employees in a workplace, this will be also qualified as a high-risk AI system. And the last three bullets that you can see on the slide, these are, let's say, general law enforcement areas, issues that are also qualified as high-risk system, AI system. For example, for criminal profiling, for using polygraphs to record persons' emotions. These are the issues connected with public law enforcement that are also subject to high-risk system. As I said previously, a provider of high-risk AI system will have to meet special requirements concerning the aspects of the product that is going to place on the market. As per the proposed EU regulation, those requirements are in order to mitigate the risk that come from high-risk AI systems. So certain mandatory requirements are in the opinion of the European Commission, are necessary to ensure the safety for its users. In the first place, the provider of particular high-risk AI system will have to provide an adequate system of risk assessment and risk mitigation. This is not clearly defined in EU regulation. What does it mean in practice? So this is definitely something that would be of particular interest for business entities, lawyers also, and other people dealing with compliance issues in every business that deals with high-risk AI systems. The proposed regulations assumes that the provider of such a system would have to ensure a quality management system, perform conformity assessment, as well as, for example, procure CE marking on the product. So it looks that every product applying high-risk AI system will be also subject to general rules on CE marking. That's also interesting thing, I believe. Another obligation is to provide the use of high-quality data sets to feed the artificial intelligence algorithm. This is mainly because to fight algorithmic bias that is often underlined in the proposed EU regulations. I think this particular requirement would be of our particular interest during our panel discussion, but let's wait for that. Another requirement, another obligation for high-risk AI provider is to keep records of artificial intelligence activity, mainly to keep logs. I think that not in practice, that is not a problem in practice, but still it imposes some day-to-day obligations, as well as having in place up-to-date documentation regarding the particular high-risk AI system, mainly because those high-risk AI system would have to be checked, verified by notified entities, as it is called in EU regulation. So to make sure that they are in line with the requirements set in the proposed regulation, and finally they do not pose too much risk for the users. Another obligation for providers of high-risk AI system is to provide to ensure human oversight over particular artificial intelligence algorithm. This is also very interesting, how to apply, how to meet this obligation in practice. As per proposed regulations, it means that particular AI system has to be responsive to the human operator. It must be ensured that a particular AI system cannot override the human operator. So this is another issue, another challenge for the providers. And another issue is that the provider must provide the users of high-risk AI system with clear information about the artificial intelligence system, one can assume that those set of information would be taken from the verification that would be performed by independent third parties before placing the high-risk AI system on the market. But it's quite interesting what would be the scope of information to be provided to users, whether they would be legible, clear for the users. That's another issue for our discussion. And last but not least, the Commission, the EU regulation says that the provider of high-risk AI system must ensure a high level of robustness, security, and accuracy of the artificial intelligence algorithm. Those adjectives are also very interesting in terms of what they would mean in practice. I've read in the proposed EU regulation that the level of accuracy, for example, would be that in accordance with generally acknowledged state of art. So it looks that the Commission took some more neutral approach in this regard, left it for further reviews and updates. So that would be, I think, variable over the time. It will be also important for a high-risk AI provider to constantly monitor, to constantly improve the products in terms of accuracy and security of particular high-risk AI system.
So as you can see, the high-risk AI is the most significant part of the AI regulation. And because of that, I would like to go into more detail in way to and present you main concept and general comments that are related to these requirements. Of course, like this in general way, this requirements and these comments and these concerns was presented by Łukasz. But I think it's really important to go through again on them and show you like what are the questions about these regulations, about these requirements in terms of the high-risk AI. So with the first one, in terms of the requirement to have an adequate system to risk assessment and the mitigation, as Łukasz indicated, this is the really important thing and really interesting for us as the lawyers, because I have no doubt that in this respect, it will be necessary to ensure some kind of cooperation between business side, between lawyers and maybe also compliance departments. This cooperation will be needed just in order to develop the appropriate procedures in this regard. And why? Because on one hand, these procedures will of course have to be based on some technical knowledge, but on the other hand, they will have to be properly formalized and adapted to the requirements of the regulation. This is why I see a lot of room for lawyers in this regard. Another requirement for the use high quality data sets, it's very important from the point of view of practical work on AI algorithms. We all know that AI systems are actually data driven. So in this respect, many questions arise as to the practical implementation of the requirements of the regulation in this regard. Do we mean that we need to use error-free data, or we can accept some certain error in this respect? In more general way, what do we mean by the high-quality data set, and how we can ensure this high quality? And this is like the open question. Maybe the testing is an answer for this. I'm pretty sure that these obligations certainly arise in the context of the AI regulation, and I'm pretty sure that the AI regulation does not fully answer them. Another requirement that has been imposed on the higher risk AI system is the requirement to keep records of artificial intelligence activity And this requirement is not so very controversial. So we can move to the another one, which is also rather the technical requirement, rather to technical things. Another requirement to draw up and keep up to date the documentation. In this respect, I see also the risk that, of course, we can build such a documentation, but what about the future assessment of this documentation? So there are some doubts in scope of the subsequent verification of this documentation by the relevant authorities. In terms of the high-risk AI, according to the regulation, we should also ensure human oversight. And this requirement arises a lot of doubts. The first question is how we want to achieve this. For example, is it essential to ensure that an algorithm is fully explainable, or maybe, like I mentioned before, the testing is an answer for this? And do we have to move the so-called glass book approach, which means that we can explain what happened inside the algorithm, or maybe we can still use the so-called black box approach? We are all aware of the increasing complexity of algorithms, so I'm pretty sure that these problems will become more and more important. With regard to the requirement to provide us users with sufficiently and clear information, there's no doubt that at this point consumers are flooded with a lot of information. You just need to go to any website to see how many windows and pop-ups you need to close to see the main content of the web page. This is the problem that may also affect practical implementation of this requirement, and we should be aware of that. The last of the requirement somehow sum up certain requirements and in fact present our expectations for this type of systems. It is obvious, at least for me, that we want high-risk AI systems to be characterized by a high level of robustness, security, and of course accuracy. This requirement also highlights our problems we encounter in the context of high-risk AI regulation that I mentioned. In particular, I mean the issue of testing, the issue of transparency, and the issue of datasets quality. So as you can see, pretty all the requirements for the high-risk AI systems raise some doubts and questions. Of course, the structure of the regulation somehow assumes that the requirements will be further detailed, probably in the standards, common specifications, and etc., issued by the European Standards Organization. But nevertheless, in my opinion, it will not solve many of the presented problems. So it's something that we should be aware. It is also a very broad topic, so I hope that we'll be able to just speak about it during the second panel discussion, and maybe find some answers to these questions, because this is like the main part, as I mentioned, the main part of this regulation.
Yes, and let us still express some additional comments, doubts, questions around the proposed artificial intelligence regulation. We put on a slide some further issues that are definitely worth discussing. First of all, we think that liability reporting, that would be something quite interesting for business entities in some practical terms. We suppose that the business would have to elaborate some contractual clauses, how to share the liability for particular items that are included in the final product. It is often the case that the final product consists of more than one AI system. It may be a composition of a few different AI subsystems, if we can call it like that. So it is interesting how the parties would share, divide the liability between them. especially that EU regulation basically says that the provider of AI system will be responsible, liable for meeting particular obligations set in the regulations. Another issue is whether we should, or if so, how to incorporate a particular user impact on the way how AI system works, what results it brings. The user will put different data to, for example, machine learning algorithms. So, and the question is whether we should share some liability requirements, obligations also with the user, not only with the producer, manufacturer, provider of particular AI system. This is also an open question worth discussing. Third item, testing of algorithms. As Michał said, there is also something that we found during our discussion with many different business entities, whether to cope with specific requirements set by proposed regulation, especially in terms of high-risk AI system, whether it would be good to concentrate on testing of algorithms. Like, for example, medicines. Medicines, no one knows actually how specific medicine works, but it works. It was tested during many tests, lengthy tests, and finally it works. And it was approved to be used among people. So maybe this is a good example, a good comparison with AI system, whether a well-tested algorithm may be approved to be placed on the market, even if data are not 100% correct, whether those data are not as comprehensive as one might expect, etc., etc. So this is another issue. And last but not least, maybe we should also distinguish another category of risk among those levels that were described by Michał in some earlier slides. Maybe there is a need to discern, to distinguish another level of AI system risk. This is also something that we could discuss. Last but not least, a quick overview on penalties that are connected with Artificial Intelligence Act. The numbers are big. The numbers are big. The penalties for non-compliance with particular provisions of the regulation. Therefore, we think that this regulation it is not something that could be easily ignored by the business. It resembles to some extent GDPR regulation that was entering into force a few years ago. It was respected also because of high penalties that were included, that were set in GDPR regulation. I think the same issue is with Artificial Intelligence Act. If you can see the numbers, they are horrible. They are definitely high. So definitely the business must be ready to adapt to employ all the requirements that are set in the regulations. Still, the Artificial Intelligence Act is only a proposed act. It is not a binding law yet. So it is a good time also for us today to discuss, to share the opinions, to find some alternative wording or solutions how to tackle this issue. This is something that we are going to do in the next stage of our today meeting, I think we are ready to go to the panel discussion. Natalia, I would give the floor to you back.
Thank you very much. So hi again, Łukasz and Michał. This was really insightful presentation. So once again, thanks a lot. And now if you want a quick sip of tea or you need just a minute of break, this is the right time, because right in a minute we will be moving to the second part, which is the discussion panel. And the panel would be divided into 3 parts. So the first part will be focused on the definition of artificial intelligence. We will talk about what AI really is and what exactly it may become in future. In the second part, we will talk about the role of quality data in working on artificial intelligence algorithms. And the final third part will cover the potential risks of artificial intelligence and the issue of keeping the control over the technology. So now this discussion will be also moderated by Michał and Łukasz, but obviously it will include the opinions by all our speakers. So now Beril, Martin, Jerzy, Łukasz and Michał, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. So let's move on to the first issue. I would say the most basic, the most fundamental one, the definition of AI system. What are your opinion? What are your thoughts about the definition? As we noted during our presentation, it is particularly interesting whether the business and any other stakeholders find the definition too extensive or too narrow. Is it really technology neutral in some sufficient way, or you expect some practical challenges in this respect? So I would give the floor first to Beril and Martin and Jerzy, and maybe then we will also share our opinions with Michał.
Martin, you're muted.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for your very interesting presentation, and it opens up what we say colloquially in the UK as a can of worms. We really don't know how this will materialize in its application. We started off with a question about defining artificial intelligence. Defining it in terms of technology is an issue because technology is a moving target, and it's moving very rapidly in this space. We're currently mostly unsupervised still. There are some very interesting unsupervised algorithms, but mostly in R&D, not really in development. Not so many, there are a few. That's one issue by itself. In terms of what is intelligence, and what is artificial, we may be careful we may be at risk of defining standards and performance beyond which a comparable human-operated organization would perform to. Are we making the barrier of entry because of artificiality, meaning non-human, an issue, when the human side may perform less than the artificial side? Is that fair? As I say, on intelligence, really, is that something that is learning in practice? Or, for example, if our friends in China developed an algorithm intelligently with a neural network, and then that was to be used here in Europe, but it was a static system, meaning to say it is not continually learning. It is learned from the parameters of the data sets which originated in China. Would we regard that as quality data? Would we regard, if that was in a healthcare application, would the data sets from an ethnic Chinese data set be considered quality or a diverse European data set? and the biases that are in there. So it's a really exceptionally complicated can of worms. I'll stop there because I don't want to continue too much.
More questions than answers from you, Martin.
Well, I'll come back off mute. Certainly, there are more questions and answers because this is not yet deployed regulation, right? And I don't know how much you guys can perhaps help me. Has there been much industry participation and comment and feedback at this stage? Because some of these definitions, for example, I'm involved in telehealth in one of the businesses I'm involved in. And one of the things that we wanted to be able to do is to use biosignal effective computing, colloquially termed artificial empathic intelligence, to determine if a patient on a telehealth app, maybe through facial recognition, maybe through sentiment analysis and vocalization, is in pain. Because if we're offering therapy, we don't want to offer therapy which is painful. We want to change that, how can I say, therapy, change to maybe an easier therapy. I'm thinking in terms of physiotherapy, maybe, for example, in stroke, which I was involved in Mind Maze for a while. We might, there are issues about whether the person is fatigued. I mean, we don't want to be in a class action suit whereby a few thousand people say, oh, this therapy that was recommended to us is causing us to be very fatigued or strain on the heart or things like this. So it's necessary, if you want to go to the leading edge of some, let us say, healthcare applications, to go into biosignal analysis so that you take a patient-centric view of the interaction. And I have to say I have more questions than I have answers. I would say there are some business areas where biometric signaling, particularly if it's very well spelled out in end-user license agreements about what the liabilities are of the company and what have you. I mean, I don't even know, you can tell me guys, the legal side, would an end-user license agreement cover you partially? If a patient says, yes, I don't mind my data being used to identify the probability of a certain, let us say, a symptom being recommended to a doctor for treatment. So I don't want to hog the channel too much, but there are many, many questions. And I'm concerned that we don't have answers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I would just answer your question, Martin, regarding whether the business was involved in consultations regarding the proposed regulation, and the answer is yes. As the European Commission wrote in some introduction to proposed EU regulation, there were over, as far as I remember, 1,200 responses, feedbacks from many various businesses from various sectors, with general conclusion that that yes, the regulation is needed, is required, and it will be welcomed by the business, and this is also something that we also got from the market players, that they accept, they approve the fact that the regulation would come into force. And coming back to definition of AI system, there were also suggestions from those parties who took part in consultations, that the definition should be technology neutral. And my further question would be, what do you think about the proposed catalog of techniques and approaches in EU regulation? Do you think it is an exhaustive list for now, or it lacks something, or it is too extensive? For example, there are statistical methods, optimization, search and optimization methods. They sound a little bit, for me personally, they sound a little bit extensive. They are somewhere outside of something that would normally one would think of artificial intelligence as a piece of software, basically. So what do you think about that? So it is too broad, or it goes in the right direction?
Well, let's talk about it in the division between supervised and unsupervised. So in unsupervised, which really falls mostly into the class of classical machine learning, the data scientist, the AI engineer, will design a hypothesis and then will see if there are clusters, typically, that will align to one classification or another. So typically, it's not always the case. You can have some quite sophisticated classical machine learning, but mostly the explicability factor is fairly straightforward because it's set up by the data scientist as a test hypothesis, and does the data support? That's a very science-based approach. Build a hypothesis, do experiments, see if it's repeatable. It's the scientific method. However, in unsupervised, and particularly in deep learning, the system looks for its own hypothesis. And often when you test with heat maps, other things, if it's an image recognition system, it makes outrageous errors. They're well-known outrageous false positives. I mean, I was working with some people at the Fraunhofer Institute, and they wrote a paper a few years ago about classification of horses against other animals, four-legged animals. And it would get and many of the test results were very good at detecting horses, until they did heat map about what part of the image was being selected to characterize the horse. And it wasn't the tail, it wasn't the mane, it was a copyright symbol in the bottom left-hand corner, because often horse images would be copyrighted, whereas an image of a deer or a cow or other bovine animals didn't have copyright images. So, this kind of error was because the system looked for its own classification success that met the criteria of classifying from the trial and test samples. So explicability is a real issue, as we all know, for black boxes in deep learning. It's really good for doing things like AlphaGo, where you have black and white tiles on a square matrix. It's a very easy mathematical problem to use deep learning, and there's no consequences in real life if you make an error. But when you apply deep learning, let us say, to discovery of new pharmaceuticals, or to healthcare, or to policing, then you uncover a massive range of issues. So where am I going with my point? For classical machine learning, I personally feel fairly comfortable and safe with that data science methodology. For unsupervised, particularly deep learning, it's more to do with the application domain than it is with the technology. Nobody minds using deep learning for playing games, particularly. But if you use it for defining energy usage across a nation, or weather prediction, or healthcare prediction for individuals, then that's a massively risky area. So the risk is partly to do with the technology, but very much to do with the application area. Does that make sense?
That's a good question.
Yes, well, I actually think the definition is not bad. The approach taken by the European Commission is like to enlist all the techniques that are considered artificial intelligence, and they don't delve into like explaining what artificial is and what intelligence is. So I think it's quite good because that would be like more like philosophical question at this point. So I think the list is the list is to be updated, right? So like you said, Łukasz and Michał, in your presentation, there are some research on new ways to make decisions based on like quantum computing or some hybrid approaches that are not listed here. But if it's to be updated, then I think it's fine. I think it's good enough, and I actually don't think that there is a better approach to define it at this point. And if we list all the techniques, I think it will be technologically neutral. Yeah, maybe Beril, you have some thoughts on it.
Yeah, I would also love to hear Beril's voice in this regard, especially that Beril has some business and academic background, so that's particularly interesting.
Thank you so much. Indeed, I'm both teaching AI methods, practicing them with School of AI, like extra activities, but also I have my own business. I see changes that I have to do with the new regulations in my business side, not the education side so much. Maybe in education, I should start sharing more information to students about the new rules also. I need to think about updating my material because these students are going to eventually be involved in companies who use AI, or they will make their own businesses. About the question if the AI definition is good, I don't see anything which I can object on that, but AI definition will be, of course, updated in time. It's not like changing the definition every week or month, maybe not even every year, but depending on the developments and the cultural changes, the society's adaptation and questions, we need to do slight updates in the definitions. I'm sure, for instance, when we started in society about AI, first time, everybody used AI to refer anything, like cat and dog classification was AI, but also something very futuristic, utopia, I mean, which could be AI, but it's never done, not implemented, but maybe not even possible. That was also called AI. And nowadays, people are started to understand the differences because we improved the definition of AI by letting people know that all the current approaches of AI which are implemented are narrow AI. And we improved the definition by saying that the narrow AI means that solving one task at a time. So you cannot expect a robot solving everything with only one model, like speaking to people, recognizing objects, and cleaning the ground and washing dishes like a Rosie robot, with only simple one model. Of course, you can make a robot, but you have to put maybe 10, 20 models to do such an application. And people used to think that you can have one AI model and it's called AI and it can solve everything. So I think we improved the definition by introducing narrow AI, AGI, ASI, artificial superintelligence, like improving our description, and people started to understand also what to expect from models better. I'm sure there will be such slight changes in the definitions in the future, depending on what comes and also what society needs to know. About you discussed a little bit about any potential dangers, like something, and the sensitivity of the data, what can go wrong and things. The new regulations of EU also wants us to develop AI responsibly, in a responsible way. And of course, there are no legal rules yet in every country or around EU. There is no AI police to guard, but it's like a personal responsibility of the company, developer, and people who are using to come together and communicate about an AI model, what to expect from it. And if you're a company, we should be, for instance, transparent about warning people what to expect. And if I say this picture is a cat, I should also tell, I tell it's a cat, but I tell it with 60% confidence. And when I'm telling it, I'm looking at this area when I give my decision, like, so people can make their own judgment about whether they want to trust on the AI's decision or not. This cat example is only a ridiculous example, maybe, but if it's a medical doctor's image, and given the cancer decision in this way, like I'm telling that it's malignant, but I'm telling it with 40% confidence, then the doctor can have a second look in a different way. So we have to communicate more responsibly, not only telling that AI tells so and this is it. So maybe I can get more questions to continue later.
Yeah, but basically, thank you, Beril, for your opinion, for your thoughts. But basically, you also come to another issue that we wish to discuss during our today agenda, that we have on our agenda, which is basically quality of data that are used to feed artificial intelligence algorithms. This is particularly significant for high-risk AI systems because of many requirements that we described on slides that are connected, that are linked with using such systems. So this is also another issue, whether the approach that was adopted by the European Commission in the proposed regulation in terms of expectations toward data sets that are used to feed algorithms, whether this is okay in terms of business, practical terms for business, or do you think that this is too much demanding, too much challenging for the business to be simply compliant with these requirements? I would also like to hear your thoughts, all of you, on this issue, because it directly affects, I think, many business sectors who would be qualified as high-risk AI systems. So all these requirements would apply. So definitely quality of data approach, EC Commission approach toward data is something which lies at the heart of the whole regulation. So feel free to share your thoughts on this also.
May I reflect about the quality of data? It's a very confusing. We should define it differently, I think, for different groups of people. When I look in scientific perspective, like sitting in my university office, the quality data means very high resolution data with very much details, for instance. But if I'm sitting in my business office, this is not a good idea. The quality data means not only a data which shows me the characteristics that I need, but also make sure that it's legal, it's collected ethical ways, and I will not encounter any business challenges of having that data, using that data, and I made sure that I informed other people that I collected this data and for which purpose. So depending on where I'm sitting at, the quality should be defined differently. If I'm developing AI models, of course, I prefer all the best resolution and everything that I can see and find. But that's not a reality in business.
Thank you, Beril. Martin, what will be your take on that?
Yes, well, I agree with what Beril has said. And it reminds me of a couple of things. I mean, first of all, what does the word quality mean in this case? Yes. So is it, and we need to define that so that everybody knows what the rules are. To me, it means having a diverse data set, a representative data set, a tested data set, which has been tested for known errors, which are updated to ensure as much as possible that it's free of racial or other kinds of bias within the set. That's just a start of what might be a test definition of what is a qualified data set as opposed to a quality data set. It qualifies to a standard. I think that standard has to be created by data scientists and philosophers and practitioners. So it's really important. If there's going to be $30 million or 300, I think the number was, right? Or 6% of the global wealth, it'd be nice to know what the rule is for the word quality. So that's my first comment. And another one, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier as an example. I was working in the American Association of Precision Medicine about 1.5 years ago, and we were looking at ways of very rapidly identifying individuals who had early COVID symptoms. And one of the promising technologies was using cough analysis or speech analysis. A person who had COVID even in the first few days of infection, depending on whether asymptomatic, symptomatic, they would have a different vocal recognition, particularly when they cough. And you could recognize a COVID cough. Amazing. But that data set was built very nicely, but for an Indian data set sample. Now, the language is different, the culture is different from Europe. I just don't know if that would have worked in Europe. And there was lots of people who were going for CE marking for this. I've never seen it as a product yet. Maybe somebody can correct me if it's out there, but that's over 1 year ago since it was being offered as a thing. So here's the point. A data set collected in region A, is it valid in region B? Or do you have to start from the beginning collecting data for the EU citizens? Because it may be different.
Martin, you indicated the issue of testing, which I would like to ask you, because this is I believe a really important thing. I indicated it in our presentation. So because when you look at the AI regulation, there's a lot of paperwork, but don't you have the feeling that there's lack of testing in this? Like, what is don't we think that the testing is something that should be emphasized in terms of the data quality?
Sure. I am. You will have to help me if you feel that there is a significant portion, annex material within the regulations. I haven't gone through it in detail. What I know is that there are very well-known error, how can I say, classes in data sets, how you frame your data to remove that copyright information that I was mentioning in my example about horse classification. So how you clean the data, how you scrub the data, how you prepare the data, and then checking for known biases, whether it be sexism, racism, color of people, etc. Backgrounds. I mean, there's a large range of possibilities. And then it's not just the quality of the data, but you do certain tests which would explore the envelope of that data. So it's not good enough, in my opinion, to test for the maybe 100 or 1,000 typical cases that you expect, the Pareto rule, the 80-20, because where the data set will fail will be in the corners of the envelope, where, for example, in driving or AI autonomous vehicles, when you get wind shear on a snowy, icy road at midnight, you put together 5 or 6 conditions. I doubt whether, I won't mention companies, have actually tested into the corners of those envelopes. Point of fact, I know they haven't, because when in Tempe, in Arizona, a person was moving across the road with a bicycle and it was late at night, the safety driver wasn't looking at the road ahead. The system couldn't or misrepresented that as a human because they had this bicycle in the frame. It didn't categorize that. So defining a basic concept of digital twin testing, so you can, in simulation, test thousands, hundreds of thousands of test cases in the simulation, and then you're constantly updating the digital simulation with the actual performance in real life. Then what will happen is that the testing of that AI system, particularly on revisions, on updates and releases, will get better. This concept of digital simulation, I think, is not well thought through yet. We're in early days of how to deploy digital simulation for testing in release of AI systems, in the life cycle of AI systems. We are on the vanguard of deploying AI systems, but some of the software engineering practices that we've been doing since the 50s are not yet embedded. The engineering aspects are not yet fully embedded in the life cycle of testing. I mean, those of you who are in businesses with software, maybe you spend 30-40% of the capital of the business in testing. It's not just development. There's 5 or 10% on documentation. There's customer support and education. Maybe only 30-40% of the business spend is in development. If you're operating a quality business.
That's a good question for Jerzy, because he is quite deeply engaged in software development. So maybe, Jerzy, what would be your thought on this?
Yeah, how much time do you spend on testing?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree that testing is a major part of software development. But when it comes to AI, actually, I would say that also, like, when we talk about the resources, then both in time and cost, it's most of the time goes for actually data preparation, the gathering, cleaning, and making sure that it's as error-free as possible. But it's interesting that the definitions here, if I remember correctly, they say something about the data set being error-free, and I don't think that's even remotely possible. Well, there are different kind of errors that can be in the data sets. But for example, when we take data that is gathered from users, we cannot have any guarantee that there are no errors there. And there are like many different sources from which we gather data, and we can clean it. We can analyze it using different visualizations, different techniques to check as much as possible, but we can't guarantee that there are no errors there. And we, in most cases, like it's not possible, so we have to deal with that. And how we deal with that, the only other thing we can do is to test that test the results. And for this, so we have to have the proper testing sets. And this is the biggest issue here, and it's completely omitted by the regulations, because like in the example of the car accidents, like the issue here is that the testing set didn't include any materials from these like corner cases. So I think this is something that would need to be included in the regulations, and that is the biggest issue here. I see. Also, I think when it comes to the quality, the definitions are quite vague. So it might be both really like nothing for business, or it can be like really stopping the business at some point. For example, like it's really from some perspective, it's strange that in the same category, high risk, we have both like safety systems that affect human lives and health, and we have like systems that are like for hiring. And I know that these are regarding like human lives in some way, because they like these affect the basic values that EU wants to promote. But for me, it's not the same like category in terms of like potential harm, like one of the attendees asked. And yeah, I guess that's it.
Yes, like I think that we tackle a lot of issues regarding the AI, but just to sum up, I would like to ask you if our approach to the AI, that we want this obligation or this regulation, the whole idea of regulating the AI. What do you think about our approach to the AI? I know that you indicated briefly these issues, but do we need this regulation? What's your opinion? Maybe Beril, can you share your opinion about that?
It's really challenging. I think EU is also making some documents about EU rules of using AI, but it's extremely challenging to define one list of rules, while there are so many fields which can use AI. Agriculture can use, education can use, medical doctors can use, or just someone in hairdresser can use AI for showing makeup. So these all applications have different user groups. They've got different needs, different data inputs. They need to be trained in different methods. They need to collect feedback in different methods. They need to host their model either on your machine or on a cloud. Depending on where the model is, what the data is, application, business, it all changes. It's impossible to set 10 rules of EU to regulate all AI applications within EU. Therefore, it's now a responsibility of each company. But then, if something goes wrong, which rule is going to judge the company, and who is going to be responsible for it? Is it the developer in the company responsible? Is it the owner of the company responsible? Is it the customers responsible? Still, there are so many unknowns. I think we need to just keep speaking in such platforms so other people hear such issues more and more often, and also policymakers hear this, lawmakers hear this, and for instance, if I need how to say, somebody to protect my company's legal issues. Also, they need to learn about AI a little bit, even though they don't develop AI. So you need collaboration of multiple sectors, and all need to learn about these open fields to set rules a little bit more concretely in the future. And if something goes right now, before setting the rules concrete, at least we know where the open areas are. And when we are, for instance, using an app, it asks, shall I access your camera? Maybe if we are not sure, we should even contact the company and ask, why do you need my camera view? With the current EU regulations, at least as customers, we have rights to do that, and companies have obligation to provide this information to their users. So at least some basics are written, but it's not really like a law. And I think we will have a decade or more to make them really laws.
Thank you, Beril. Yeah, go on, Michał.
Yeah, I would like to ask Martin about his opinion in this regard. Do you think that we need a regulation and our current approach is fine, or you have maybe a other idea about this, other position?
Well, there's, I think, three questions there. Is the regulation necessary? Yes, it is. I was involved with some European talking position about 3 years ago in Brussels, and we were talking early days as this formation in a social cultural context. And I made a presentation there, so maybe I'm at fault for some of the early ideas that went into the regulation. I doubt it. But is the regulation good enough today? Probably not. But then, as somebody said in the comments, GDPR was, I think, proposed in 2012, was it? And it took like maybe 6 years before it became law. I'm not exactly sure of those dates, but that sounds more or less correct. So if that is correct, then we have a path for dialogue and for involvement. And as Beril has said, it's important that you have today opened this forum to reach out and to encourage people to address the issues. I think testing is really important. And as another commentator has made, maybe we should be using AI tools to help us test AI systems and to make sure that we're looking in all of the corners. So it has maybe a real world model of causality, which is something that we're working on in academia, and then bring that into the space. So you define your problem and it says, okay, have you thought about snowstorms in Canada in the winter with high wind? Oh, not really. Well, okay, there's a test case there. I mean, there's lots of opportunity to improve the testing. Indeed, I anticipate there should be a lot more academic papers written in testing area, less about a minutiae twist of a backpropagation algorithm. Let's get to grips with life cycle business issues, testing of AI. I'd like to see academia really look into that area. And the concept of risks and safety, it rapidly goes into futurism when you get to the possibility of AGI. Because now you've mentioned that the regulation is now based upon narrow AI for specific tasks. When will that change? Will it change? I suspect it will, probably not for 10 years, but chatbots was mentioned, and they're getting pretty sophisticated. GPT-4 is, I was reading an article the other day, is maybe going to be released in a year or two's time, and it's going to have an order of magnitude more data used. At that point, can we say it understands natural language? I don't think so, but it's going to become really ubiquitous in many fields, I suspect. And we're inching step by step closer to generic AI. And when that comes about, the regulations and safety aspects are off the wall.
By the way, adding more data doesn't make a model AGI from narrow AI. So GPT-3 might be trained even with more data. Sorry for the birds. But you will not achieve to next level by just adding more data. You might even lose the accuracy of your system by adding more data. You might shift the models.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can be done in hybrid and neurosymbolic AI, which I think may take some of the opportunity to make more generic NLU, natural language understanding. And there are people who are talking about next generation deep learning that might do that. So there's a contest in terms of the technology of where we'll go to AGI. But yeah, I've written an article recently about GPT-3 and GPT-4, which is that they do not understand natural language.
No, they do not. I mean, they might respond something, but it's not because they understood it, because they just found something in the training set which seems like similar. It's not that they understood the story. You can just simply check it, ask to summarize a book, for instance. Ask GPT-3 or 4, whatever, read this book and make a summary. And the summary will not be the selected sentences came together. It's going to be from your own words. They cannot make summary because they will not understand. Understanding and making a language sentence are not the same thing. I can look at the grammar rules. I can make a Japanese sentence. I can tell it correctly, but it doesn't mean that I understand Japanese.
That sounds like Cyril's Chinese room argument.
But I would like to add something more about which disturbs me personally a lot about GPT-3 for like initiations. I think we should put the carbon budget to AI training initiations because of our climate emergency.
I agree.
Yeah, like GPT-3 already took a lot of resources to be trained, and GPT-4 is going to be like, if it's going to be a magnitude bigger than GPT-3, then it will take like a lot of more of computing power and then the resources. So.
And do we need it? It's just for answering a question.
Yeah.
Well, I'm involved in chatbots with which may use some of these transformer technologies. Not that I like GPT-3, I prefer GPT-Neo because it's open source and things like this. But without going into the technology, you really need, in this transition years, the next decade, still to be using symbolism. I don't want to get into technology with Jerzy, but I think some of the problems that you mentioned, Beril, can be perhaps resolved by the integration of hybrid symbolism with neural networks, but this is a technology I shouldn't get started on in this discussion.
Okay, thank you for that part. I'm thinking about the classification of risk that was proposed by European Union. Martin, you have touched slightly this topic. It was also underlined by Jerzy, I think, that certain let's say areas, business sectors would be simply over-regulated if they would be qualified as using a high-risk AI system. We know from other market players that, for example, qualifying AI systems used for credit scoring seems to be overregulated because there was an argument that credit scoring is only about giving some recommendation, advice about entering into sale of specific services or not. So perhaps giving this example, perhaps there is some space, some room for distinguishing another level of risk, somewhere between the high risk and medium level. Definitely, credit scoring is something that affects a person seriously, because that's usually a big issue for a person who needs to take a loan, for example. Whether he or she gets the loan or not, this is something very, very important for a person. But at the same time, it's difficult to make an equation between such situation and a situation if we make some activities that discriminate someone because of his gender, ethnicity, etc., etc. So, but according to the proposed regulation, those two examples would be on the same level in terms of risk. So, approving the approach that these are serious issues for a person, maybe in terms of requirements that are going to be imposed on the business finally, and maybe there should be some another level discerned from those that has been already proposed to better fit for the business. On the end of the day, we need to remember that this is another regulation that would impact the competitiveness of European business. I'm also to some extent an example of business player. I'm a lawyer. I'm running a law firm, so that affects the competitiveness of each European Union business. So we need to strike a balance between protecting the fundamental rights and those who will provide products incorporating AI systems. So I'm really I would really consider whether there is a need for discerning another level. That's less important how we call it, how we would define it, but to meet everyone's interest in this regard. So that would be my take. I'm also curious, what do you think in these terms, in terms of the competitiveness of EU economy and business?
Okay, so there's at least 2 points there. Number one, yes, there is a real risk that EU takes a principled stance on behalf of its citizens to regulate AI, and as a consequence loses out in the AI race against China, which is a completely different socio-economic cultural model, and even the United States. One is very libertarian, one is very statist, and in Europe we have the rights of man and our human rights. And I wish it was global, but it's not. So that will remain a feature of the oversight of the regulation. Are we doing harm to AI in the EU? I mean, Brexit, self-inflicted wound, from my opinion, to the EU, because the UK has one of the large resources of AI development in the EU. So we don't want to put the EU in a position where it's protecting its people by not allowing them to have the benefits of AI, simply said. In terms of the categorization of the levels, the definitions, and I think Beril mentioned this in part, what I'm going to say, which is you could have high risk and augmented AI hard risk. What do I mean? So in a healthcare symptoms checking application, something which I'm involved in, you might collect data from your Apple Watch, from facial recognition, from voice recognition, and subjective chatbot interactions with a patient. You may be in a position to make a pretty good diagnosis, but it's risky if there's a false positive or other things. So maybe in those cases, certainly for the early years, until you recognize if the system is actually surpassing human level diagnosis, at that point it's different. But in these early years of concern, you should always pass the diagnosis to a human doctor or nursing clinician to say, this is what in America they call a subjective objective action plan. I think the acronym is SOAP. And they get the document, they read it and say, yeah, I pretty much agree with that assessment. That person has influenza and probably doesn't need a COVID test or doesn't need a PCR test, something like that. So if in some cases, for example, in HR, don't let the AI system reject a candidate. Let the AI system recommend this candidate because of these reasons, and it should list out as a record what those reasons are to a HR manager, who then in 10 minutes goes through the reasons, checks the resume and says, hey, this system missed this point. This system is not correct and it's a false positive. So you augment with a human final decision maker, the proposals of the AI system. I would think that's a way forward of somewhat passing the risk buck back to the human.
Yeah, definitely, Martin. I guess taking human in the loop approach changes the risk that is involved in using AI, and especially in the areas that you mentioned, so HR and credit scoring. We actually develop a credit scoring system, so we know how to do it and how it works. So the final decision still is for a human to do in terms of bigger loans. But when it comes to smaller loans, it's if it's a small amount that people expect to get an answer to automatically in 2 minutes, there are lots of these right now. So they don't actually change their lives. It's not the same category as safety systems in aeroplanes or anything like that, or in medical usages. So it's totally different category, and I think putting it in the same bag is wrong. And also the definitions also mentioned accuracy, which is really a very bad metric to take into account when it comes to AI. Because for example, there's a very, very common example here. So if you take into account for example, tests for any medical condition, and 99 out of 100 people would not have the condition, then the system can just tell that no one has the condition, and it will have 99% of accuracy. So it will be very good, right? But no one will get the treatment. So no, it's not. And the accuracy is very, very wrong metric here. And actually, in some cases, even the accuracy is only a little bit above the randomness, it's a good result, because it can automate some things that can be later checked by humans. So it doesn't have to be 99% all the time to be really useful and to be helping people do their work. So if it's even 60 or 70 is accurate in 60 or 70% of cases, it can help to automate some things. And then if we allow people to do the final call, then we don't need to deal with the risk of making the wrong decision, because it's still a human who decides.
Sure. I was involved quite a while ago in some algorithmic trading, AI algorithmic trading, and you only have to be 51% of the time accurate in your predictions to make a tremendous amount.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I would also ask Beril. You're also Beril, an entrepreneur. How do you find the general the regulation in terms of affecting your business, competitiveness of your business toward other businesses from outside of Europe?
That's a little bit mentioned actually, but in order to touch to business sides accurately, I can say that now with the new regulations, of course, I do respect it a lot, and I'm glad they are there. We have to provide more transparency about, for instance, what data we collect and how it's going to be used, how the AI is trained, and how it could be biased. We need to tell about all, and we need to tell when we show the results, how I make the reasoning for that result, so the user can understand whether they should trust on it or not. But when I'm explaining all this, what data I used, how I used it, and how I made the reasoning and so on, I'm telling so much about something happening within my company, and which is my IP rights. So I'm opening it up in little bit worrisome extent regarding not a regular customer, but the business who can understand actually what I'm doing in programming basis within my system, and they can easily replicate it. So it comes with cons and pros for business. Probably we will figure it out how to do it more effectively later, to communicate what we are doing well, to open it up, provide the transparency, but also make sure that we don't really open up all the IP of the system, which could allow other companies to easily replicate what we have invented. So there are still questions over there, but I'm sure we will figure it out, or other business partners will figure it out in a quick way. When such stressful demand comes, something easily pops up to help business and people. We will see some developments in this area. We also mentioned about, in which extent to trust AI and whether to replace a real human or not. In my opinion, the AI is a tool, like you have a fork. Just assume that this AI is a fork, that you can either use the fork to feed someone. You can also use a fork to kill someone, I always say. So this AI is a tool, and it's the intent of the person, users, to know, to really, in their heart, to judge how to use it to benefit or not. And eventually, these applications, I think, should be used within people in any case. Some good examples are, I know some doctors, they are treating cancer patients, and in radiotherapy, they need to label 3D data before they target the tumor within the machine. And to do that, they need to look at maybe thousands of images of slides, which makes 3D altogether, and they need to use a paint-like program to label at each layer. And to do so, they can only treat one patient in a day. It takes almost 8 hours in a day to generate one 3D model, which is well labeled. And let's assume an AI can do that in a few seconds, and the doctor only uses 8 minutes of him to go to layers which are providing low confidence results and correcting those. And the doctor could treat maybe 10-20 patients in a day instead of one patient in a day. So AI could improve our lives without causing a lot of damage in our lives. And another example, for instance, it's not a very nice example. I don't want to be a bad example, but maybe it's, I don't know, just opening minds. Once I was moving houses and I was really so tired and I have to drive my car after loading the car. I was driving in the midnight and I fell asleep in the car because I was really sleepless and tired. And luckily, I just drove to the sideway while I was sleeping and the car stopped. But I was just lucky that I fell asleep and the car stopped at the right side of the road. There could be also a truck next to me, which I could go under. It was just a good luck. Let's assume that a self-driving car only focuses on taking over such difficult situations. If my car took me safely to right side, not trying to drive me to home, I don't think we should replace the person with AI, but AI could bring benefits to our lives if it saves me from a truck nearby, puts me to site safely, and lets me drive after I can.
I think there are already some systems that do just that in newer cars. I just ordered my new car, so quite certain there are some systems like that. So if I may add something, there is also like the question of risk is also like, well, every decision system has some risk involved because there's some decision, and whether it's AI based or it's human based, there are also like different risks involved here and here. So for example, like if human makes a decision, it can be like corrupted, or he can prioritize his own interests over the interests of the users or other people, and he can simply be ruled by emotions and make decisions based on emotions, not on facts. So even can change the results unwillingly or unknowingly because of the emotions. And AI have different problems, but still they are designed by people, and people can even people can affect the results of AI algorithms and how they work, and they can do it even unknowingly, like by providing some bias in the data set, or providing data that is not correctly cleaned or clear to make sure that there are no problems that would affect the results.
Yes, thank you, Jerzy, thank you, Beril, and also Martin, for your couple of last couple of thoughts on whether we really benefit from this regulation or not here in Europe. I think through this couple of comments we have actually answered one of the questions asked in our chat box. I think we can now close our discussion, give the floor to Natalia, and answer some questions from our attendees. So Natalia.
So thank you, Łukasz, and also thank you, Beril, Jerzy, and Martin, for sharing your thoughts, and also for a really nice wrap-up in the end to sum up all your opinions. And yeah, we have a lot of questions on the chat, actually. So I think that with no further delay, we will just go through them one by one, all right? The first question is from Patricia. The question is, do I understand correctly that each member country can apply these regulations to a different extent?
I think that not in 100%, because this is like the resolution regulation. It's not like the directive, so it will bind all member states in the same way. But of course, because this regulation is not 100% clear, and we will be probably based on these standards that will be issued later, there is a risk that there will be like the different approach to the details. So the main idea, the main rules that are established by the AI regulation will be the same, but in details, I see the risk that there will be like a different approach to some extent.
I'm guessing that the COVID situation is a good example to look at. It will be something similar. For instance, EU suggests something wearing masks, but the countries put different rules. Some of them mandate, and in some places, some of them do not put rules. So EU can suggest, but probably the real rules are going to be defined by each member country by themselves.
Great, thank you. And right, we've got the second question is, why does European Union classify both safety and HR systems in the high-risk category? For me, there is a huge difference in the possible harm done by the misfunctioning of these.
Yeah, well, I mentioned, partially answered this question. Like, for me, it's strange that these, like many different solutions and with different level of possible harm are classified in the same category as high risk. And I don't know, like I probably know why, because like it's to some point affect the basic rights and the values that EU wants to protect and promote, but still, I think that there should be another category or some distinction here, because like the risk is definitely different for these cases.
True. Okay, thank you. Here is the third question.
I think Martin wanted to add something, but he was muted.
Yeah, I was muted. I would just ask people to reflect when they put out their resumes and CVs for a new job. How many human HR managers respond to you? Usually you're lucky if it's 1 in 10 or 2 in 10. So, and I think that's a high number. So if you had an AI system which was augmenting that HR manager, that gave the list of the reasons why this person was not qualified, it might at least give the human HR manager an opportunity to pass that feedback to the applicant. So if you're creative about how you use HR systems, AI, with human operators, as I mentioned earlier, about healthcare systems still using the clinical human paradigm that has been built, at least until it's demonstrable that these systems perform better than the first point of access, for example, then I think we should be okay. But regulation, I think, is sensible. It's just how you apply it.
Thank you, Martin. We also have something from Ricardo. It's more like a comment, not like a question. Would be interesting to know whether the errors, on the other hand, could have a different weightage based on the impact they have.
Interesting question.
It's possible. You can always say this error has $100,000 impact across the EU. I don't know how you'd work that metric, but it's possible. and whereas another error may cause the denial of human rights to 10% of the EU population, and you'd have to, well, how much is that comparable an impact? And I imagine somewhere, even in GDPR, there is how much of a violation should this be in monetary terms? How do you set the penalty for a particular violation? I don't know how that is done. I guess there's an algorithm for it, Jerzy. What do you think?
Well, I don't know, actually. So maybe our law specialists would have some answer for that.
Quite a hard nut to crack.
Yeah, it's a difficult, to answer that question. Yes, it's difficult to assess how to calculate this, and mostly it's done by the authority or by the court at the end. The exact the penalty. So, and this is the issue also because this regulation is so general. We find this out that there are no really specifically detailed rules. So yeah, it's gonna be really difficult to establish not even what should be the penalty, but also if the infringement occurs. So yeah.
Thank you, Michał. Vasai asks, are there European Union countries advised to set up an enforcement framework which is closely aligned with each other and has the right tools?
Maybe I missed the point, but does that not reflect to the earlier question about how do you assess the policing and the judicial review of these things? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I have a feeling that I've already answered this question. So yeah, there will be a huge issue to assess whether we comply and whether we infringe this regulation. So yes.
I'm guessing that in practice that will be defined after people start having issues. At some points, lawmakers will start seeing that what common concerns are they are encountering, and they will decide finally putting a rule on that. So I'm guessing that the start will be a little bit painful for some people, but it will be learned by practice, I'm guessing.
This is what happened with GDPR, basically, that we didn't know how to assess whether we comply with the GDPR, and then what the fee should be, what the penalty should be, the amount of the penalty, and then we see this, in the news media, this highlights that there was the penalty of thousands of the euros or millions of euros. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, not earlier than after 3 years from GDPR entering into force, there are concrete, specific decisions in this regard with penalties. So not before 3 years we will get know what would be the approach in terms of non-compliance and consequences of that. So that's a long way ahead of us still.
Yeah, I think there's also another issue that we haven't touched, but the sharing of responsibility here would be very interesting, because if we build some AI model, it often uses another model, so we can use some transfer learning, or we can just use some tool that has some AI part in it, and who would be responsible if the system, the whole system, makes a mistake. That's a very interesting question. I personally don't know how the law would interpret such situation, and if the responsibility would be shared, or would it be like a single entity that would be responsible for it? I think it also will be something similar to GDPR, where we have some roles, right? And so the responsibility is shared.
Yes, Jerzy. I tried to cover this issue when I was saying during the presentation about subsystems, AI subsystems. So the case in which a final product consists of more components that include AI systems, techniques, and so on, and what would be the division of liability between the entities that contribute to the final product, and whether only the provider who placed the product on the market would be liable toward the final user. This is definitely something that business will have to tackle with and somehow elaborate, I guess, contractual provisions in the contracts between them to cover this point.
Yeah, I can also add that we are now discussing about rather the regulatory matters, but there's like the ongoing legislation process over the liability of the AI, which we don't have a draft yet, but I believe that probably this year or the next year we'll have a draft of another legislation over the AI. So this is like the good question, and we see how this liability rules are gonna be established.
Yeah, and I think that it will just remain an open question. And the last thing that we've got on our chat was actually already answered, because it's about when can we expect the regulation to be introduced. And I think that we talked about it like nobody knows, and maybe like GDPR 6 years or so, right? So I think that the questions are out. I would like to say a big thank you for all the speakers, because without your contribution, this event wouldn't take place. So thank you. And also a big thank you to every participant who asked their questions on the chat. I hope that we will see each other on the next edition of AI Waves. And as for now, stay tuned. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.